It's 1994 at LaGuardia Airport in New York. 24-year-old Prince Khalid bin al-Saud of Saudi Arabia runs to airport police officers, screaming that he's been kidnapped, and points to the two men who had been accompanying him. If there are any of my loyal subjects here, please call the embassy and CNN, the prince shouts at stunned onlookers. The confused airport police officers detain the men, who calmly present some paperwork and explain that they are bail bondsmen. The police allow them all to go. The two men rent a car, throw Prince Khalid into the trunk, and drive 24 hours to Miami. Jose Moreno was born in 1970 in Bogota, Colombia. At age 5, Jose became an orphan, and he and his younger brother, age 3, were forced to fend for themselves on the dangerous streets. Colombia was in the middle of intense military conflict, and thousands of displaced children roamed the streets and sewers, trying to hide from predators and the death squads who targeted them. For 2 years, Jose protected his younger brother fiercely, foraging and stealing food and finding safe places for them to sleep. In 1977, the two boys were picked up by an orphanage, and before they knew it, they were on a plane to Michigan with their new parents. Jim Gignac and Nancy Fitzgerald were a middle-class couple who were eager to give the two brothers a better life. Jose was now Anthony, and his younger brother was now Daniel. Their neighborhood was predominantly white, and the brothers were bullied in school. Anthony began telling his classmates that his biological mother owned a local hotel and his biological father was a famous actor. He continued telling lies throughout school to make himself seem rich and powerful. He became obsessed with TV shows that depicted wealthy families and started recognizing luxury brand names. In grade 6, he managed to convince a Mercedes-Benz dealership that he was a Saudi prince, and a salesman even took him on test rides. Anthony craved acceptance, and he believed he could attain it through material wealth. A few years later, Jim and Nancy got divorced. Anthony's younger brother Daniel was sent to live with his father, while Anthony stayed with his mum. Suddenly, the one constant in his life was gone, and Anthony suffered major mental breakdowns. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but never received proper treatment. His mum could no longer handle him, and Anthony was sent to state-run psychiatric hospitals and halfway houses. He felt abandoned and trapped in these facilities, so at age 17, Anthony ran away and found himself on the streets once again. Anthony decided this was the perfect opportunity to form a new identity for himself. He started going by Prince Adnan Khashoggi, who was a real Saudi arms dealer and the world's richest man at the time. Anthony convinced an Arab family in Michigan that he was a Saudi prince and lived with them for a couple of months until he got caught. He then made his way to the land of glitz and glamour, Los Angeles, and managed to obtain a credit card under the name Omar Khashoggi. He was caught and convicted for failing to pay his $8,600 limousine bill. In 1991, Anthony turned 21 and really started to up the ante. His name was now Khalid bin al-Saud, which was actually the name of a real Saudi prince. He racked up a $3,500 bill at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel over 4 days. He rode around in limos but never paid the $7,500 bill. He convinced the Louis Vuitton store on Rodeo Drive to let him have a set of luggage that his father, a Saudi prince, would pay for later. He was caught and spent a short stint in jail, while the LA Times newspaper dubbed him the Prince of Fraud. That same year, Anthony managed to obtain an American Express card under the name Khalid bin al-Saud. He stayed at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in San Francisco for several weeks before landing back in jail for 53 days. He then violated his probation and spent Christmas at the luxurious Halekulani Hotel in Hawaii. He befriended other guests at the hotel and conned a couple into writing him a check for $8,500 in shares for a Saudi oil company that didn't exist. He then convinced another couple to cover his $20,000 hotel bill before disappearing. In July 1993, Anthony turned up at Disney's Grand Floridian Resort in Orlando, where he ran up over $14,000 in fraudulent credit card charges. He pleaded guilty and was given probation, and once again vanished. He was caught after he swindled $27,000 out of the Grand Bay Hotel in Miami and $51,000 from the local Saks Fifth Avenue. He was charged with fraud and grand theft. While in jail, Anthony, as Prince Khalid, began calling lawyers to pay his bail. He promised that his father, a Saudi prince, would cover all the legal fees. Oscar Rodriguez was an attorney from Miami who saw this as a great business opportunity and agreed to take on the prince as a client. Oscar Rodriguez hired 2 bail bondsmen to post a $46,000 bond to release the prince. The bondsman picked up Anthony and drove him back to their office to wait for the money from the Saudi royal family. But when hours passed with no sign of the money, the bail bondsman had to drive Anthony back to jail. In the car on the way back, Anthony asked the bondsman to stop at an American Express office. He got out of the car, entered the office hysterically crying, and claimed that he had been mugged and all his credit cards had been stolen. He said he was fearful of how upset his father, the king, would be, and begged to get his cards replaced. The American Express staff asked him to verify his identity by correctly stating his last 2 purchases. Little did they know that Anthony had sneakily promised Rolex watches to other staff members who agreed to give him the correct answers. The next day, American Express issued him a platinum card with a $200 million limit. Anthony went on a shopping spree before buying out the entire first-class cabin of his flight to Michigan. He pledged to donate $1 million to a university in his home state. Then he flew back to Miami the same day. The 2 bondsmen who accompanied him the entire trip started to believe he really was a Saudi prince, until they received a phone call from the American Express fraud department. This is when the altercation with LaGuardia airport police officers occurred. Anthony was sentenced to 616 days in prison, but being placed behind bars did nothing to stop his scam streak. It was now August 1994, and at some point, Anthony had reconnected with his younger brother Daniel. From prison, Anthony contacted Syracuse University and informed them that Prince Khalid wished to donate $45 million to the school. He requested that the university wire a portion of the taxes from the donation to his bank account based in Michigan. Syracuse wired $16,000 to a bank account held by Daniel Gignac. Both brothers were convicted, with Anthony receiving 46 months for wire fraud. He then had 37 months added to his sentence when he lit his jail cell on fire and spilled shampoo on the floor to make guards trip so he could escape. Anthony continued to run his grifts from prison through the late 90s. He fooled a Yale graduate lawyer and even had a meeting with Johnny Cochran, who was by then famous for his defense of O.J. Simpson. Anthony was released from prison in the early 2000s and returned home to Michigan to live with his mother Nancy. He went straight back to his old tricks. He was given 2 Cadillacs, no questions asked. He dined and shopped and stayed at hotels without ever paying the bills. All of this was because he convinced people that the Saudi royal family would send payments. In 2003, Anthony was arrested for impersonating a diplomat. He had charged $11,300 at Saks Fifth Avenue and $17,600 at Neiman Marcus to his, quote, family accounts. It turned out real Saudi princes and princesses did have accounts at the stores, but they informed the American authorities that they had no association with the Michigan Prince Khalid. This time, Anthony found himself in an interrogation room. He insisted that his name was Khalid bin al-Saud and even had plenty of presumably forged documentation to prove his connections to the Saudi royals.
Anthony Gignac is not my name. I actually legally changed my name to Khalid bin al-Saud. My social security number is Khalid bin al-Saud. My college transcript is Khalid bin al-Saud. I know it's hard to believe. Everybody, I know it's like, this kid is super good. And I give myself credit for being intelligent enough. Okay, well, let me call the embassy and just show you how I can get a hold of the ambassador from Saudi Arabia.
He even spoke some rather convincing fake Arabic, but ultimately wound up back in prison. He was in and out of prison a few more times over the next decade for running similar scams. It's now 2015. Carl Martin Williamson, a British asset manager with a background in law, was getting ready for a business meeting with a Saudi prince. Carl was well-spoken, charming, and exceedingly skilled at telling lies. He had friends in very high places all around the world, so he was eager to meet with Prince Khalid, aka Anthony Gignac. Anthony had been living large in Miami. He was always covered head to toe in designer clothing and jewelry. He also had a new friend, a tiny chihuahua named Foxy, who never left his side. He had assembled an entourage who followed him everywhere and hired bodyguards who wore fake diplomatic badges. He was renting a 3-bedroom penthouse on the exclusive Fisher Island, but told everyone he owned the entire apartment building of 54 luxury units. It was like he was back at grade school, telling lies about his status and wealth to win friends. Anthony had a proposal for Carl. The world's largest company at the time, Saudi Aramco, had announced they were considering going public. The Saudi Arabian oil company was valued at a record $2 trillion. And Anthony claimed that as a Saudi prince, he could offer a, quote, friends and family special for potential investors. Carl didn't hesitate. He agreed to set up an investment company for the prince, Martin Williamson International. Carl worked his connections and told potential investors about his opportunity to buy the pre-IPO, or pre-initial public offering, so that when Aramco does go public, they would see the same level of returns as the Saudi royal family would. High net worth individuals would need to first demonstrate their respect and devotion to Prince Khalid by presenting him with extravagant gifts such as jewelry and Rolex watches. Altogether, Anthony and Carl fooled 26 people into handing over a total of $8 million. None of the funds were ever put into business opportunities or legitimate investments. Not only did they con wealthy business people, bankers, and attorneys, they also convinced regular people to give them significant amounts of their money. Victim impact statements reveal that several of these people have not been able to recover from their financial loss. Carl helped usher Anthony into a whole new league of white-collar fraud. Anthony always knew how to look and talk the part, but now he had connections to real high flyers to give him credibility. Carl even purchased diplomatic license plates from eBay for the prince to adorn on his luxury vehicles. Anthony and his entourage hung out on his yacht, took joyrides in his Ferrari, ordered thousands of dollars worth of food at Miami's top restaurants, and posted it all on Instagram. But Anthony's appetite for opulence was only growing, and he soon found his next target. Jeffrey Soffer is a billionaire real estate developer who lived the life that Anthony Gignac pretended to live. The Soffer family owns several hotels and apartment buildings in Florida, including the iconic Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami. Jeffrey split his time between his super yacht and 3 mansions, traveled in private jets, and was married to supermodel Elle Macpherson. However, the Fontainebleau Hotel had been struggling with debt for several years, so when a call from a representative of Prince Khalid bin al-Saud came in, Jeffrey was immediately interested. The Saudi prince wanted to buy a 30% interest in the Fontainebleau for $440 million, an overvaluation of about $140 million. The prince informed Jeffrey Soffer's team that he owned an entire high-rise apartment building on the exclusive Fisher Island, but something about the way the prince was conducting business just felt a little off. Jeffrey did his due diligence and ordered a background check on Prince Khalid while inviting him and his entourage on a trip to Aspen. They boarded Jeffrey's private jet and soon found themselves in the lobby of the Grand St. Regis Aspen Resort. Prince Khalid's phone rang. It was the management of the apartment he was renting. They had received an inquiry about whether he owned the whole building. Khalid realized that Jeffrey was onto him and reacted by throwing a huge tantrum in the middle of the lobby. "You've insulted my honor," the prince screamed. "My father, the king, is going to be very upset." He threatened to back out of the Fontainebleau deal unless the Soffers presented him with a gift as a sign of respect. The next day, the group reconvened for lunch. Jeffrey, who had already gifted the prince artwork and a $5,000 diamond-encrusted dog collar for Foxy, gave Khalid a $50,000 Cartier bracelet. This seemed to placate the prince, and they proceeded to their meal. Jeffrey glanced over at Khalid and noticed he was eating a large portion of prosciutto. Alarm bells immediately started ringing, as pork is a forbidden meat in the Islamic faith. Back in Miami, Jeffrey and his team started digging deeper into the prince. They enlisted the help of a private investigator who produced a long report of the fake prince's 30-year scam.
Anthony Gignac had been arrested or convicted 11 times in his life, and it was concluded that he may have really started to believe he was a prince. His goal was to get close with the Soffer family, so he could tell potential investors that he was close with the Soffer family. He had no intention of ever purchasing the Fontainebleau Hotel. This report was then handed over to the FBI, and the Diplomatic Security Service, or DSS, was assigned to the case. Anthony and Carl had been traveling around Dubai, Hong Kong, and London to meet up with more potential investors. They were now offering opportunities to invest in a non-existent casino and pharmaceutical company. Anthony was of course flying with someone else's passport. DSS agents were waiting for him when they landed at JFK International Airport on the 19th of November 2017. Anthony was placed under arrest and his false passport and belongings were all seized. He protested in the middle of the airport, screaming that he had diplomatic status. When that didn't work, he tried a different tactic. "I have national security information you'd be interested in hearing," he offered. Carl Williamson's North Carolina home was raided on the 14th of December 2017. Federal agents interrogated him for 6 hours, but he insisted that he didn't know the prince was a fake. That same night, Carl tried to hang himself. He died 2 days later from the injuries. In May 2018, Anthony Gignac pleaded guilty to impersonating a foreign diplomat, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Investigators discovered dozens of forged documents from over the years that supported Anthony's claims of being a Saudi prince. Federal agents seized $450,000 worth of jewelry, along with $80,000 in cash and various pieces of expensive artwork. However, it was discovered that some of Anthony's watches and jewelry were fake, and much of his bling were actually cheap glued-on diamonds. His cars and yachts were all rentals. His Fisher Island penthouse only had a few pieces of store-bought furniture inside, even though he hired an interior designer who had royal clientele. Anthony was sentenced to 18 years in prison. He finally owned up in front of the judge. Quote, "The entire blame of this entire operation is on me, and I accept that." He is currently serving his sentence at the Federal Detention Center in Miami. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support this channel even more, we've just launched a Patreon. The link is in the description if you'd like to help us spend less time on our day jobs and more time working on content. See you in the next video.